Imagine a leader whose obsession with power and control shaped the destiny of millions, plunging the world into one of the darkest periods of modern history. Adolf Hitler, a figure whose notoriety spans decades, wasn't just a ruthless politician, but also a man full of secrets, fears, and paranoia. But what many don't know is that, beyond being a tyrannical leader, Hitler had a series of bizarre behaviors and habits that could easily be pulled straight from a movie script. Today, we're diving into 10 of these curiosities that will likely surprise even the most avid historians. First off, few people know that Hitler, the man who preached Aryan racial superiority and the purity of body and mind, was actually addicted to drugs. And it wasn't just occasional use. Hitler consumed an absurd amount of chemicals daily, including cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. Ironically, these same substances were distributed to Nazi soldiers to keep them active and tireless on the battlefield. This addiction, documented in various medical records recovered after the war, is just one of many contradictions in the Führer's life. What's even more shocking is that Hitler, the man responsible for the deaths of millions of Jews, actually had friendships with some of them. At one point, he personally saved certain Jews from Nazi persecution. Old friendships and personal favors led him to order the survival of certain individuals, which has sparked debates among historians, questioning whether this behavior reflected a human side to the dictator or was simply another example of his manipulation and power plays. Now imagine the paranoia of a man like Hitler, constantly aware that his life was in danger. After surviving over 42 assassination attempts, Hitler developed an almost obsessive fear of being poisoned. To protect himself, he hired a team of young women whose sole job was to taste his food daily before he ate. These women risked their lives at every meal to ensure their leader could continue his megalomaniacal plans. One such plot involved, believe it or not, a chocolate bar. In 1943, the British Secret Service developed a bomb hidden inside a thin layer of dark chocolate, hoping that Hitler, known for his love of sweets, would take the bait. A single bite would have triggered the explosive. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your view, this plan never materialized. Another fascinating aspect of Hitler's life was his failed attempt to become an artist. Before his rise to power, Hitler tried his hand at painting, selling his work on the streets of Vienna for modest prices. Ironically, he relied on two Jewish art dealers to sustain his artistic career. Years later, he would orchestrate the extermination of millions of Jews, a bitter twist of fate. But the eccentricities don't stop there. Hitler was so obsessed with control and power that at one point he decided German schools weren't glorifying his image enough. His solution? He ordered all crosses and religious symbols removed from classrooms and replaced with portraits of himself. Not satisfied with that, Hitler even dreamed of surpassing the Pope, planning to seize control of the Vatican and proclaim himself a deity to Germany. Though this grandiose plan was never realized, it's a testament to the level of megalomania that dominated the Führer's mind. Another example of his obsession with total control can be seen in the so-called baby factories, where Hitler and his Nazi allies sought to create a perfect race. Thousands of children born in these factories underwent strict physical and intellectual training and were even subjected to bizarre processes like ultraviolet light baths to lighten their hair and fit Aryan beauty standards. This macabre scenario begs the question: how did a man with so many personal flaws, addictions, and peculiarities manage to influence an entire nation and change the course of world history? Perhaps the answer lies in his powerful oratory, his manipulative abilities, and the frustrations of a people devastated by defeat in World War I and the subsequent economic crisis. Adolf Hitler was a multifaceted figure, a man who mixed strategic genius with unchecked madness. He was at the same time the supreme leader of one of the most brutal regimes in history, and a man with human weaknesses, fears, and vices. His life is filled with mysteries and contradictions that continue to both fascinate and terrify the world decades after his death. Want to learn more about Hitler's insane decisions and how he orchestrated the Holocaust? Let's dive deep into the Nazi regime and discover how the dictator's mind worked. If you're enjoying this content and want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What lessons can we take from Hitler's story for today's world? Drop your opinion in the comments below, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the next episodes. Together, we can continue to remember, reflect, and learn. One of Hitler's most audacious plans involved undermining the power of the Catholic Church. For him, the Pope's influence was an obstacle to his desire to be the supreme figure in Germany and eventually the world. In a bold move, he ordered that all schools in Germany remove religious symbols and replace them with pictures of himself. Hitler believed that, over time, he could erase the image of Christ from people's minds and replace that devotion with worship of his own. The peak of this obsession came with his idea to invade the Vatican. Yes, Hitler had actual plans to take over the Vatican, kidnap the Pope, and blame the crime on criminal groups like the Italian Mafia. His goal? To proclaim himself a deity and suppress all religions in Germany so that he would become the sole object of worship. Though this plan was never executed, it shows just how far Hitler's megalomania could stretch. However, the mounting pressures of the war and growing resistance within Germany itself eventually weakened this strategy, leaving it on paper. But what this episode reveals is the darkest and most delusional side of Hitler. A man who saw himself not just as a political leader, but as a near-divine entity. Another insane decision of Hitler and his regime was the creation of the so-called baby factories, known as Lebensborn. The goal was simple: to create the perfect Aryan race. Babies deemed suitable were put through intense training from childhood to ensure they became the future ideal citizens of Nazi Germany. Mothers, selected for their racial purity, had two choices: raise their children under the Nazi regime or hand them over to certified Aryan families. Many of these children never saw their biological families again. In addition, children from occupied territories like Poland were kidnapped and subjected to the same process. Those who didn't meet the Aryan racial standards were discarded and sent to concentration camps. This macabre project shows the level of control Hitler sought, not just over Germany's present, but over its future, manipulating the next generations both genetically and ideologically. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Nazi regime was its obsession with the Aryan race. Hitler's vision of a world dominated by racially pure individuals led to a series of bizarre and cruel actions, many of them orchestrated by Nazi doctor Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. Mengele's experiments on Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz are some of the most shocking examples of the madness that pervaded the Nazi regime. Mengele was obsessed with twins, particularly those who fit the Aryan ideal. He believed that studying twins could provide the key to creating the perfect race. Often, these children were subjected to brutal experiments: injections of chemicals into their eyes to try to change their color, amputations, and procedures without anesthesia. One of the most inhumane practices was the attempt to create Siamese twins by sewing them together, which invariably led to a slow and painful death. What's most terrifying is that many of these experiments had no real scientific purpose. They were conducted simply to satisfy Mengele's morbid curiosity and the twisted ideals of the Nazi regime. In many cases, newborns in Auschwitz and other concentration camps were killed or used as test subjects for pseudoscientific experiments. The mere fact that these babies didn't fit the Aryan ideal was enough for their lives to be discarded, revealing the complete disregard for humanity that characterized Hitler's regime. Hitler's paranoia was not entirely unfounded. At the height of his power, he was the target of dozens of assassination attempts. Historians have documented at least 42 plots to kill the Führer, many of which came dangerously close to succeeding. One of the most famous plans was the July 1944 conspiracy, known as the Stauffenberg plot. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a German army officer who had lost faith in the Nazi regime, led a plot to place a bomb at a meeting in Hitler's headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair. But by a twist of fate, the bomb was placed under a heavy table that absorbed much of the explosion. Hitler emerged practically unscathed, while several others were killed or seriously injured. After the failed assassination attempt, Hitler intensified his hunt for traitors, leading to the execution of hundreds of people suspected of conspiring against him. This episode demonstrated that while many within the Nazi high command had become disillusioned with the Führer, the protective net around him was so efficient that eliminating him became nearly impossible. Security around Hitler became even tighter, fueling his paranoia and pushing him further into isolation, relying on an ever smaller circle of advisors. Another fascinating aspect of Hitler's life is the mystery surrounding his personal diaries and writings. For decades, historians have speculated about the existence of secret documents written by the Führer himself that would reveal his most intimate thoughts and long-term strategies. Many of these documents were lost or destroyed in the chaos that followed the fall of the Third Reich. But some reports claim that a significant portion of Hitler's manuscripts have been found and are under the protection of governments and institutions that fear the impact of their release. Among these documents would be personal letters where Hitler expressed his twisted visions for the future of Germany and humanity, along with disturbing confessions about the genocide and concentration camps. The possibility that these writings might reveal an even darker side of Hitler continues to intrigue historians. But so far, only a few fragments of these texts have been made public. The question remains, could these documents contain secrets that would change our understanding of Hitler? Or are they simply reflections of a mind already known for its brutality? Whatever the case, if these writings are ever released, they could spark new debates and revisions about the impact of the Nazi regime. To fund the Nazi war machine, Hitler and his allies found a cruel yet pragmatic solution. Concentration camps weren't just places of extermination, they were also sources of financial exploitation. The most notorious of these camps, Auschwitz, generated millions of dollars in slave labor. Prisoners were forced to work in munitions factories, coal mines, and other projects that directly benefited the regime. In addition, the Nazis profited from the belongings confiscated from prisoners. Everything from jewelry and money to clothing and personal items, which were either sold or repurposed by the state. In many cases, even the bodies of prisoners who died in concentration camps were exploited in brutal and inhumane ways. Nazi partnerships with German businesses led to lucrative collaborations where slave labor became an integral part of the war economy. This perverse system, which turned human lives into mere commodities, was one of the many ways the Nazi regime financed its war of conquest. The idea that a concentration camp designed for mass death could also be a money factory is one of the clearest examples of how Nazism destroyed any shred of morality or humanity. Among the most fascinating post-war mysteries is the theory that Hitler didn't commit suicide in his bunker, but rather escaped to Argentina. This theory, which has gained traction over the years, is based on eyewitness accounts of people claiming to have seen Hitler in South America after the war ended. Additionally, several Nazi submarines were found near the Argentine coast, fueling speculation that they may have been used in the escape. According to this theory, Hitler and his wife Eva Braun fled Berlin in a small plane before boarding a submarine bound for South America. Some believe that he lived out his final years in a secluded house in Patagonia under a false identity. Local reports even describe a man resembling Hitler, sans his famous mustache, living in isolation and under constant watch. However, most historians reject this theory, pointing to evidence such as dental records found by the Soviets that were compared with Hitler's and confirmed to belong to him. Even so, the mystery remains, and the lack of international access to Hitler's remains continues to feed speculation about the dictator's final fate. In June 1941, Hitler launched one of the largest and most ambitious military operations in history, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. With over 3 million soldiers, the Third Reich was confident its blitzkrieg, lightning war, would quickly crush the Red Army, securing control over vast Soviet territories and their resources. However, this decision became one of the greatest strategic blunders of the war, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi domination. At first, the invasion was successful, with the German army advancing rapidly, capturing key cities, and surrounding hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. Hitler was certain that the Soviet Union would collapse under German pressure. However, he underestimated two critical factors, the Russian winter and the determination of the Soviet people. As winter set in, the poorly prepared German troops suffered immensely. Temperatures dropped to unbearable levels, and soldiers lacking adequate clothing and supplies faced logistical nightmares. Meanwhile, the Red Army, under Joseph Stalin's command, reorganized and launched devastating counterattacks, pushing the Germans back. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought between 1942 and 1943, became the decisive turning point. Considered one of the most brutal battles in history, the fight for Stalingrad was fierce, with heavy casualties on both sides. After months of intense urban warfare, the Germans were surrounded and forced to surrender. This defeat marked the beginning of the collapse of the Nazi war machine. The Third Reich never fully recovered from the blow dealt at Stalingrad, and Soviet forces began relentlessly advancing toward Germany. The Blitzkrieg, which had been so effective in the early stages of the war, faltered in the vast, harsh terrain of the Soviet Union. The extreme climate and the tenacious Soviet resistance destroyed Hitler's strategy. The dream of dominating Eastern Europe was shattered, and Germany rapidly lost ground. Conversely, the Soviet Union not only withstood the attack, but also began reclaiming territory and advancing toward Germany with unrelenting vengeance. While Germany was losing on the Eastern Front, a new threat emerged in the West. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces, led by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, landed on the beaches of Normandy in occupied France. This event, known as D-Day, marked the beginning of the end for Hitler. The success of the Normandy invasion was the result of months of meticulous planning and brilliant deception. Hitler had been led to believe the Allies would attack elsewhere, causing him to keep a large portion of his forces in the wrong location. When the Allies broke through German defenses on the Normandy beaches, they advanced quickly through northern France, liberating Paris in August 1944. The opening of a new front added even more pressure on the already overstretched German army. Nazi forces, now fighting on two fronts, began losing ground at an accelerated pace. The German troops, exhausted, poorly equipped, and unable to withstand the industrial and military superiority of the Allies, were in retreat. The decisive Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate attempt to change the course of the war in the West, but its failure sealed the fate of the Third Reich. With Germany collapsing on all sides, Soviet forces rapidly advanced through Eastern Europe, while the Western Allies continued pushing from the West. By April 1945, the Red Army had encircled Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich. Hitler, isolated in his bunker, knew the end was near. The Battle of Berlin was the final act of World War II in Europe. The city was devastated by constant bombardment, and street fighting was intense. German troops, made up mostly of teenagers and elderly men, fought desperately, but they stood no chance against the overwhelming military might of the Red Army. Inside the bunker, Hitler continued to issue orders to divisions that no longer existed, demonstrating his complete detachment from reality. As Berlin crumbled around him, he refused to flee, stating that he would die in the city. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide alongside his wife, Eva Braun. His body was burned by the few remaining loyal soldiers, and the remains were taken by the Soviets. With Hitler's death and the fall of Berlin, the Third Reich came to an end. Germany formally surrendered on May 7, 1945, marking the victory of the Allies in Europe and the end of one of the darkest periods in human history. If you want to keep exploring more stories like this one, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on upcoming content. Let's keep learning and reflecting together.